We are going to be led through our second to last panel, which is going to run from right now to 4:30 Eastern, hopefully with 10 minutes of Q&A at the end. We're going to be jumping into technology and choice. And guiding us through that panel is going to be Michael Horn. He's going to be chairing this panel. Good afternoon, Michael. He is the co-founder and a distinguished fellow at the Clayton Christensen Institute for Disruptive Innovation, a nonprofit think tank, and he serves as a principal consultant for Entangled Solutions, which offers innovation services to higher education institutions. He's the author of Disrupting Class, How Disruptive Innovation Will Change the Way the World Learns, and the Amazon bestseller Blended, Using Disruptive Innovation to Improve Schools. Michael, good afternoon, great to see you, and enjoy the next 48 minutes and come back to me in 38 minutes for some Q&A from the audience.
Sounds like a plan. Appreciate it, CR, so much, and excited for the conversation. Excited that Darrell prompted us with the Clayton Christensen quote combined with Star Wars, which I think Clay, were he still with us, would appreciate quite a bit. I will pass it along to his family, though, Darrell. So thank you. Excited for the panel conversation today and talking about technology and the role it has in choice, particularly in this moment in the pandemic. And joining me for this conversation are three distinguished panelists that need no introduction, but I will give them brief ones as we all celebrate the 25th anniversary of PepG and your birthday, Paul, and thank you for the contributions and the opportunity to foster the conversation that we're not just about to have, but that we've had all day today. So first, Steve Klinsky from Modern States, which basically makes a freshman year for free online. So Steve, welcome. We're very intrigued to hear how the pandemic has affected that organization and what you're seeing more broadly as shifts in the ecosystem. Diane Tavner, my co-host on the podcast Class Disrupted, but also for all of you, the founder of Summit Public Schools, which has been referenced a number of times throughout the day. Also the author of Prepared and founder of an organization with Mira Brown, who will also be joining us, of Prepared Parents. And Mira will take over for Diane when she has to run to a fire drill that is on her end. So we appreciate you both stepping in and supporting in that part of the conversation. And then Mike Petrilli, also no stranger to all of you, is the head of Fordham, Checker's successor there, and a colleague of mine as an editor at Education Next. So welcome all. I'll start with Steve and then Diane, because you all have a front row seat into how technology right now is expanding, or perhaps in some cases restricting choice in the time of COVID. And you each have a different perspective on that. You're bringing a different part of the system. And so I'd love you just to tell your version of what you're actually seeing on the ground through the eyes of your organization. Steve, I'll start with you, what you're seeing at Modern States. And then Diane, if you can jump in right after from the perspective of Summit, that would be great. So Steve, take it away.
Well, great. Thank you. And thanks for everybody on this panel and in the audience. It's a great event. You know, for one quick minute, Modern States is effectively a digital public library of college courses taught by some of the best professors in the country. And importantly, it's not, and we give the courses away for free online as a charity with free textbooks. Importantly, it's not just a MOOC that is a free course. It's specifically matched up to an accepted exam that's been accepted by 2,900 universities for the last 50 years, called the CLEP exam from the College Board, the College Level Examination Program exam. And it's like a version of the Advanced Placement exam, but you don't have to be a high schooler to take it. It's very widely accepted. So we give away the courses for free, which is simple. Once you make the course, there's no cost to letting another viewer watch the course. So that's very low cost. And the CLEP exam costs roughly $100. And we're paying for that for any student who completes a course as part of the charity. So we right now have about 230,000 users. I think it's the largest free college for credit program around. It's open to anyone of any background if they want to just take the course and learn it. And where COVID fits in is, there's both good and bad to it for our specific program. One obstacle has been that the testing centers have been shut. from the College Board, but those are now reopening. So that was a temporary issue, which is now behind us. I think the bigger issue is there was already a tremendous need to make an on-ramp to college that's affordable. We all know there's $1.6 trillion of student debt. Online courses have been around for credit for over 20 years, but at the same cost as sitting in the seminar room with a professor, which is really not what technology demands that it be at the same cost. There's regulatory reasons for that. And so the demand is bigger than ever. And the sort of ways that it's being used now is, specifically with COVID, for example, the Carnegie Foundation came to us and said, there's a whole set of high schoolers in New York who have just graduated, who've been accepted into college, but these are economically challenged kids, unlikely to start because of COVID and other issues. So we can give them the modern states courses so that they can stay on time and track to go to college when these are done. Let's say they start in 6 months or a year, they'll still have their courses done, and it's an attempt to keep them on track to enter college. So that's one program. Right before COVID, we announced a program with Purdue, with Mitch Daniels and Purdue, where they have created something called Fast Start, where Purdue is now encouraging every student in Indiana to take modern states courses and saying, actually, if you take 5 of them and pass, we will automatically admit you into Purdue. That's how and they're going to use their rural operatives in both rural areas and their urban outreach. So, and so I think the need for it is more obvious. I think people more and more realize what online education is and how expensive it is under the existing system, and how it really doesn't have to be so expensive if you're just trying to be cost efficient. And so that's what I would say. I'll come back to questions later, but that's the 2-minute version there.
Great. Michael, I'm happy to jump in and talk a little bit about what I see happening in K-12, both across the landscape and then at Summit. What I see happening across the country is for the first time in a long time, most families are confronted with the fact that their schools aren't really offering them education, and certainly not childcare, but education even. And so this is an expansion of choice, because most families kind of go through our system without giving a lot of thought. They just kind of go along with whatever the next thing is. And suddenly when there's nothing there, they have to start looking around and seeing, what am I going to do for my child and their education? And so I think we're seeing the consumer, if you will, open their mind up to the possibilities. And certainly technology provides an expansion of choice and opportunity on that front. It's unfortunate that it's coming this way. It's certainly uneven and inequitable, but I do think there's an opportunity because people's minds have been open to actually considering that they do have choice, and what do I want if I have choice? On the Summit front, I think it's a much more hopeful and optimistic story of choice, in that, we are a model that it prides itself on being personalized, that leverages technology extensively. And when we were forced out of the buildings and into the virtual world, and through necessity, given a lot more policy freedom, if you will. Even as charters, we don't have a lot of freedom on attendance rules and seat-based rules and lines of sight rules. And when those things freed up for us, we are seeing expanded choice in really meaningful ways for our kids and our families. And I'll just give you a couple of examples. Every student at Summit has a personalized learning plan. This is historically what we've done. Their goals drive what they do, but it's constrained by the walls of the building and what we can do. And in the springtime, when COVID hit, all of our kids renewed their personalized learning plan and were actually able to make really good choices for themselves about asynchronous learning opportunities depending on what was going on, and which classes they would attend versus the ones where they would get tutoring, versus how they were accessing the learning experience based on their personal goals and how they were doing and how they wanted to finish the year. We had some kids accelerate and finish early. We had some kids extend and go longer into the summer. and a variety of other choices. And what's fascinating is the demand now, even among our student population, as we re-enter the fall. I can't tell you how many emails I'm getting saying, we're going to do that again, right? You're going to give us the choices again. And so I just even see it in our school as an expansion of choice and opportunity.
Makes a lot of sense, and appreciate that it's not just choice of program, but choice within the program as well that this opens up. Mike, love to turn to you at this point. You get the opportunity to look at this from a global perspective where Diane started her answer. What are you seeing in terms of technology expanding choice, and how is it also impacting some of the new and also existing organizations that have been in the space, both from an entrepreneurial angle and innovation angle, and some of the ones that you've been critical of in the past, like full-time virtual charters and things like that?
Great. Thanks, Michael. And hello, everybody. And like everybody else said, congrats, Paul and the team on the 25th anniversary. So exciting. I will say, by the way, I'm still miffed that Checker said that his panel was the most distinguished of the day. That did not go unnoticed. Incorrect, of course. Let's just make it clear, though, Michael Horn has the highest room rater score of the day if we're looking at the background. I mean, I like how you very nicely advertise your books. Anyways, very impressive work there on that. Look, I think, first of all, when we talk about any of this in education, it's important for us to talk about which level of education we are talking about. It's exciting to hear from Steve about a higher education innovation. Diane, with the amazing work she's done at the high school level. Obviously, this is playing out right now very differently depending on the age of the kids. And I think everybody knows that it has been a real struggle for the littlest kids. And not only because Zoom school is tough when you're 6 and you're squirming and it's hard to, make sense of it all, but let's face it, kindergarten is mostly about getting used to classroom routines and how to get along with other people. And, there's just no way we're going to be able to do a lot of that remotely. And yet remotely is what, most kids right now in America are still doing. So I think we need to, let's make sure maybe in this conversation, we are clear about how old the kids are that we're talking about. Look, I think like Diane said, I think this crisis is going to open up some opportunities that are really important at the high school level. Let's never go back to the point where it's somehow, it's illegal to do full-time online school from home, or it's legal to do full-time school at school, but it is illegal to do some hybrid of the two, which is, I believe, the case that we had in the district and charter sector in all 50 states before this. It would be exciting, I think, for a lot of kids to have a model that looks a lot more like a college model, where the high schoolers maybe go to class 20 hours a week, and they spend the rest of the time at home or maybe in a computer lab at school, doing independent projects, working with small groups, like you would if you were in college, rather than sitting there in a seat for 6 or 7 hours a day, 5 days a week. That could open up a lot of possibilities, and let's hope that policymakers are smart enough to allow that sort of thing to happen. We're going to need to put some pressure on that. I think we've all seen that there's a lot that can be done remotely, and look, I think this has forced many teachers, especially at the secondary level, to get more comfortable. But the second point I want to make is when we talk about technology, let's remember to talk about the most important technology in education, and that's the curriculum. We did a report a few weeks ago. Our friend and colleague Greg Banerick looked at 8 high-performing charter school networks and how they were able to flip the switch to remote learning last spring, and did an amazing job. The big networks that everybody's familiar with, KIPP and Success and Achievement First and Uncommon, Rocketship. Some of them did have a lot of technology resources, Rocketship first among them, and a lot of familiarity. That certainly helped. Some of the others, not so much. They hadn't necessarily embraced tech as we usually think about it, but they did have a common curriculum. And that made all the difference. That meant that they were very quickly able to make this transition to remote learning. It also meant that they were able to suddenly think about different roles for teachers because they had that common curriculum. So rather than having every single teacher record lessons on their own or give live lessons on their own for the same material, they said, hey, why don't we just have the best teacher in our network in a given grade or given subject do the recording? And that saves a bunch of time for everybody else. And we can then build around that. Now, that's not a brand new idea, but even these high performing charter networks hadn't gone there yet before this pandemic happened. And they were able to do that. But it worked because there was an assumption that they were in networks where you don't let teachers just go into their own classroom and close the door and do whatever they want. The notion was, look, curriculum matters. We're going to work collaboratively as professionals to build a great curriculum, and then we expect everybody to teach to that curriculum. Of course, there's still personalization. There's still ways that teachers can be creative, but that's an important building block. And so I think that's an important technology that we need to talk about as well. Lots more to discuss, but let's start there.
No, that's super helpful, Mike. And you're raising, I think, the point that we're going to have to get more into, which is that we need to create some categories on a bunch of these dimensions to figure out the truth there. Diane, I know you have to go in like 2 minutes, so I'll ask you this next question and then let you go, and Mira can come up and step in for you. So Diane, I'd love you actually to start there where Mike left off in terms of the common curriculum, because that is to some extent a feature of Summit, but it's also executed very differently from the networks in some respects that Mike just referenced. Can you reflect on how that plays out? And then Steve, I'll come to you with a similar question, because there's actually a commonality there.
I couldn't agree more that the common curriculum actually enabled what Michael is talking about. I would even take it a step further and say that Summit has a full model, and it's inclusive not only of the academic curriculum, but of the social emotional learning, the habits of success, as we call them, and just the whole child approach. And so unlike what we saw in most school districts, where it was like everyone was out on their own and teachers were left to search for everything from the platform they would use to record and capture lessons to the worksheets they were using and whatnot, we have a full model. So there was no question. It was literally flipping a switch in order to switch over. And so couldn't agree more that that approach to learning that is really user-centered. It puts kids at the center and says, what is their total experience? It needs to be coherent, it needs to be aligned, and the adults need to come around it, is how we should be educating our kids. And that starts with a common curriculum and a common model. And really what's missing across the board in schools, I would argue that that is really challenging to do in this day and age without a strong technology infrastructure and backbone, and that you can execute it excellently if you have that, because you have great data, you have the ability to move quickly, you have, so many tools that if you're doing paper packets, you can't execute it. But couldn't be in stronger agreement that what we truly need are aligned school models that are coherent and actually drive all kids in the direction we want to go. And it's the big missing gap in education. And now I'm going to be the big missing gap. Thank you so much. I'm going to go run those schools now.
Thank you, Diane, for being with us. We appreciate it. Mira will step in, but Steve, I'll turn to you because technology, common curriculum, best teachers, those are all facets of what you were talking about. So I'd love you to reflect on Mike's point as well.
Yeah, well, a couple things. One thing on Mike's point about the hybrid, I'm not sure exactly what the rules are, because we are seeing a number of high schools who are adopting, our courses where the kids take it in the school with teacher supervision so they can both finish high school and have college credits in hand, and are making a big push in that area. So I don't know if they're violating, I won't give their names because maybe they're violating rules I don't know about. On the common curriculum, the great thing about a CLEP exam is, let's say it's college algebra, there's a set of scope and sequence that gets tested on the CLEP. So the key is to have a great professor who can teach, all the material that we know is going to be tested. What we did is try to pick the best professor we could. So we found a great professor from Johns Hopkins who teaches the course, but he only has to do it once, and then 1 billion people could theoretically watch that course from here on, without ever having to pay again. It is conceivable, if we had a bigger budget or the government did it or something, that, one person teaches in a lecture format, maybe someone else teaches with a different approach, but it comes back to the same scope. And you don't need 2,900 college algebra teachers all teaching college algebra, independently. If it's online, you have one, it could be one or two or three that would, for a cost purpose, would be the most efficient way to do it. So, but there is a clear scope, there is a clear amount of material that's tested on each of these exams, and we get the best professor we could to teach it.
Makes a lot of sense. And just on the hybrid point, actually, it's interesting. I think there's sort of two distinctions there. The a la carte course offerings that you're talking about, Steve, have always been permitted, is my understanding, in almost all states. But Florida, I think, was the only state that allowed the hybrid arrangement that Mike was referring to, where I think it was the Tim Tebow law, where you could take some courses sort of fully off the campus and then come in for certain activities.
Right.
If I'm remembering correctly. But what I want to turn now to the question of sort of the categories that Mike started to raise, and he raised elementary, middle, high school. We can also look at this from a demographic makeup of low income, upper income, and so forth. And Mira, I'll start with you on this as you come in, and then we can swing around to all of you. But I'm curious, who is the technology helping the most right now in this choice context, and who is being left behind? And Mira, for those that don't know, you run this new group, Prepared Parents, and so you are interacting with a lot of parents constantly on the front lines of this, so and helping them, including my family, navigate this moment of choice in educational curriculum for their kids. So love you to reflect on where you're seeing this work well and who's being left behind right now.
Thanks for having me. It's always hard to step in after Diane, so I'll do my best. But it's really interesting, Michael, because I think that there's the obvious answers, right? There are many families, and kids being left behind on the technology front who don't have access to technology, and therefore don't have access to learning, essentially. And then it's been really interesting over the last 6 months, though, to watch different districts sort of ebb and flow out of access, and therefore parents ebb and flow out of access. And it has literally changed week by week. So we've heard parents who, were just shocked and, quite frankly, like appalled that they just bought this home and what they thought was a good neighborhood with good schools that they extended themselves for, spent a lot of money on, and then literally got a workbook and the teacher disappeared, right? There was no, and that was what they were left with for 3 months. And that was sort of one extreme all the way up to the school who did have iPads. But then you have a kindergartner like mine who is just staring at an iPad, like, what do you want me to do on this iPad? And so we heard, I think, every story you can possibly hear. And I think that that's part of the challenge right now, though, is that parents there's not one profile, one experience that's happening. There are many, and they're changing, and parents are looking for, and all we keep hearing from parents is, I want confidence in the decisions I'm making. I want to know I'm doing the best for my kid in this moment. But this moment is literally this week, and then, oh wait, we're going hybrid next week. Oh wait, no, the classroom's shutting down because someone's been exposed. No, we're going back into, no, we're back to remote, right? And so how do you help parents find consistency and a steady sort of, which is what they're desperately seeking, and they don't want to lose another year. They keep saying, like, where's the meaning? How do I find meaning this year for my kids? How do I help them find purpose and meaning this year for my kids? And so that is what essentially we're hearing all over the country. And it's really hard because you need hundreds of solutions in some ways, right, for parents. And we have some ideas at Prepared Parents, which I'm happy to talk about.
Mira, you mind if I jump in? I'm curious, there's been some talk today about the pandemic pods, or what some people want to call just parent pods, and a lot of enthusiasm for that, understandably, that this could be a really interesting new form of microschooling. I guess I maybe am on the team that's a little bit skeptical that this is going to be more than a tiny little niche. It's kind of gotten blown up in the press. I guess I'm curious from your perspective, do you have any sense? I mean, it's so hard to tell, but is this a real thing, a real trend, or is this just, something that the newspapers are writing about, but it's pretty going to stay pretty tiny?
I think that there's a trend in it. I don't know if the pod is the trend. And here's what I mean by that. I think that there is a trend of communities coming together and trying to figure out how to solve a problem, because it became really obvious in July that there was no one solving the problem for parents. There was no one who was coming up with a national or regional or state, strategy to say, we know you're hard pressed right now. And so that's why you saw, and parents are desperate, right? Certainly for childcare, but like I said, I think they're desperate to not have a year be wasted, not sort of feel like they're sacrificing their children this year. And so I see it in multiple ways. I see pods, and this is one of the things I see parents moving in and out, and I'm on that pandemic pods. Like I read through, we're talking to parents who are pod leaders. We're talking to parents who put their kids in pods, pulled their kids out of pods. Because at the end of the day, like we're also human. And I think parents are like, oh, this is really complicated. Like there are other families I need to think about now. There are, or whatever it might be. So I think pods, the trend of a community coming together, or the trend of, oh, wait, I can have my child who's usually in a classroom of 30 kids, 25 kids, be with 10, or I can have my child really like focus and things like that. Because we're seeing churches and synagogues and mosques, right, all open up. We're seeing small businesses, we're seeing preschools, right, like everything you can imagine. The karate place by my house, the gym, like all of these places are opening and saying, hey, we're going to offer you a safe place for your kids to come and learn for the day or for a select number of hours and things like that. And so I don't know if pods in what we're calling them will continue, but I do think sort of parents' expectations of, wait, like learning can be more personal. This can, you know what I mean? Like there can be that feeling of like, we can focus on what matters most for my kid, and I can actually kind of figure out what that is, and I can have a window into what's happening. I don't think that that's going anywhere.
Well, it's so well said, Mira, and that these civil society institutions that a lot of us love to talk about and write about, the churches and the YMCAs and all the rest, we've always been hoping that they would sort of step up. And of course, in many cases, they have over the years started charter schools or now with some of the savings accounts get engaged. And so here's another example of that, right? I mean, I've joked at times that for upper middle class parents, we can say, look, we all homeschool. It's just that some of us send our kids to a school from 9 to 3, but then there's a lot of other homeschooling that's going on, in the afternoons and at night and on the weekends, where we have always been doing a la carte, finding, now it might be things that are more about athletics and social emotional and character and religion and all the rest, but piecing that together. And of course, that's right for parents. They got to figure out the 9 to 3 part and the academic part, but that's part of a much bigger puzzle.
So
I think those.
Go ahead, Mira.
I was going to say the last part about that I think is interesting is that as those organizations that maybe were the after, sort of in the after school realm are stepping in, I think what's really interesting that we're seeing as we talk with them also, and as we try to partner with them and provide resources, is that they're starting to be like, wait, what happens every day? Because they're partnering and they're saying, okay, we're going to help you facilitate school, right, in a safe place, basically forming my little cohorts and pods. But then as they're trying to facilitate, they're realizing, wait, we have a whole number of hours we need to fill, because kids actually only have maybe an hour or two, again, depending on the community and the district, right? Maybe an hour or two of actual learning if the school had provided an iPad or a Chromebook or whatever it might be. So now how do we fill this time and make that meaningful? And so now they're actually out looking and saying, great, now we have these kids that we need to take care of. What do we do? And so there's just a lot of eye-opening, I think, happening to sort of education as a whole, outside of just parents and outside of just the districts and the schools, that I think is also really interesting to recognize, and for us to think about what we can do moving forward once the pandemic is over, so the progress doesn't backtrack.
So I wanted to take off from there and turn to the institutional response, because what's occurring to me is that there's a real community response. There's an entrepreneurial response to this moment. I'm in the land of a zillion school districts that Checker referenced earlier, where we have opted for, being in New England, we've opted for, I think, constructing a greenhouse in our backyard for the pod that we're hosting. So it's going to be an interesting winter here. But the question, I guess, is, are we going to start to see the institutional side? And we had a big discussion just before about interdistrict choice and so forth, and what is real or not about that. Are we going to start to see districts meaningfully respond to use technology, leverage technology to create more choices for families that maybe can't stitch these together or don't have these community resources swinging into action, or instead of those community resources? Steve, I'll start with you, because and then go around to everyone.
Yeah, well, look, I think that it definitely will happen. You know, the name of our charity is the Modern States Education Alliance, because from the beginning, the idea was that this is a tool that we're doing like a public library that could be used by anybody in the way that they wanted to use it. So, and as time is going on, there are more and more parallel models where we're just being used by other people. So again, high schools who want their kids to graduate with college credits in hand. Foundations who want the kids who've been accepted into college to stay on the college track. Major universities like Purdue who want to keep their costs under control and help kids afford Purdue, you know, formal alliances. The state of Michigan just announced a partnership with us for workers training. They have something called 60 by 30, and they're using us to help train adults. The state of New York announced an alliance with us for their Empire University to expand what Empire can do. So it's like creating a microscope and saying, well, what scientist wants to use it? It's going to be used in all sorts of ways. But the problem is 99% of people still never heard of a CLEP exam and don't know what it is, and it's been around for 50 years. I mean, it's just a lack of knowledge, and you know, and we're trying to let institutional funding for this grow so we don't just you know, get overwhelmed by demand. But I think it clearly is a 95% cost savings for kids who want to, or adults who want to put in the effort to use it.
Mira, why don't you jump in there? What are you seeing from institutions? And then Mike, come in after.
Not much more than I think than what you guys have actually, what you guys have talked about. We're not hearing a lot from parents who, again, I come in from working directly with parents on the ground. And so we're hearing a lot more from the community side than sort of institutionally. So nothing more from me on that side.
Look, I think there's some good and some bad. So the good is, I guess I'm cautiously optimistic that we're going to see districts do a much better job this fall with remote learning than they did last spring. Of course, it's going to get much worse. Now, that might be just because of my own bubble. I don't have a greenhouse, but I do have a bubble. Now, we live outside DC, Montgomery County Public Schools in Maryland, where my kids go. And look, it's dramatically different and better. I mean, as Mira said, last spring, it was like an hour or two, maybe, of them doing anything. And now it's a real day. You know, my boys are busy from 9 to 3. I love it. It's probably too much staring at the Zoom, and I'm hopeful that that will get adjusted over time. But, you know, they are doing school, and they're doing assignments, and they're getting graded, and, you know, it's happening. And there's, you know, a full day of teaching and learning going on. And, you know, my sense is if there's homes that have good internet and a safe place for kids to learn and all the rest is, you know, you might get a decent percentage of the regular academic experience, at least. So that's good. Now, is it representative or not? I don't know. It's so early. Of course, all the sort of back to school stories were about various glitches and challenges. But let's hope that as that gets worked out, you know, that some of these, especially big districts and big urban districts, have figured out how to get the devices and the hotspots into the hands of kids, and you know, solve some of the lunch problems and all the rest. And that if we're doing remote learning for the foreseeable future, that it goes a lot better this year. I'm somewhat optimistic, but we'll see. I think oh, go ahead, Mira. Yeah.
I was going to say, I think the one group, and we don't have to go deep into this, that we did, I mean, I personally experienced this as a son who was an IEP, and we were hearing this from parents. We're getting the most actually from parents of kids in special education, because that is a group, though, that it's is hard pressed to be served by Zoom, right? And so, and I do think that that is an area that is still has big question marks for a lot. We're hearing that from parents of, you know, I appreciate my district. And for example, for me, I appreciate my district too, but, you know, I got a list of like, here's how you can do his accommodations. I was like, I'm a parent. I'm not really sure what to do with that, you know? And so I think that there is, though, as always, right, a subgroup, and that is a group of students who districts I still think, and there is already that tension between, you know, parents and districts when it comes to that. And we are getting, I can't tell you how many parents asking for additional support, asking for resources, projects they can teach, things that they can do off of Zoom to support their kids, because, you know, it's just not, remote's not working is just what we keep hearing. Remote's not working, remote's not working.
Now
I wanted to tee you off on that, because it occurs to me in listening to you all that there's a distinction on the technology side in terms of there is tech delivered, so technology used to deliver the education. There's also technology used to enable different choices within contexts. And you're all speaking to different variations of this, but that it's very unlikely that within a district, all of the parents have the exact same needs or want the same thing for their kids. I mean, even Mike, the charters that you all profiled, I looked at that and said, phenomenal for them. I would pull my kids completely out of that because I don't want them staring at a screen, you know, in that sort of lockstep way for that long, right? And so there's variation in context. And so you can use technology, it occurs to me, to find or set up or create different models with, if you will, within a community even. How much are you all seeing of that side of this? And do you expect, thinking again from sort of the notion of creating more choices for families out of this moment, do you think that'll grow? Steve, why don't you kick us off?
Well, yeah, I mean, look, again, our model was to be as simple and as universal and as easy to apply as possible. So, you know, you can, if you have an iPhone or any sort of internet connection, you can get a year of college for free now. So just as an example, there's a young mother who's on our website who has a sick child who's at the National Institute of Health every day getting treated. So she's in the waiting room every day. Her dream is to be a nurse, but she can't get to college. You know, she can't afford it because of all her challenges. She's finished a year of courses on her iPhone while she's in the waiting room of the National Institute of Health. And, you know, so you don't need, the issue that I see, at least at the post-secondary level, is not the difficulty of delivering the technology. YouTube exists, Khan Academy exists. It's the credit has always been the block. And so what the technology we need is how to get more exams that are high quality exams that are widely accepted. So we reverse engineered into the CLEP system because it's the most universal system that's around. But if you want to do this for vocational training or, you know, medical coders or whatever, you just need to invent some exams. The courses are easy as heck. And the technology is your phone. So it's not a technology question, it's an exam question, which is a regulatory issue.
I'm happy to jump in. I think that there is the delivery, right? So I think what for those who have it, the technology allows the delivery of what you talked about, Michael, is the most important thing being the curriculum. I think there's two things happening though. One is, especially if you want to talk about just individual parents, and then you want to talk about pods, community organizations, whatever it might be. There's so much noise. I mean, we thought there was a lot of noise in this sort of innovation of the spring of everyone wanting to help, and I'm sure Prepared Parents is lending to the noise as well, though we're trying to cut through it. But like, there's so much noise right now. So as a parent, it's really hard. And I think as a community organization, it's really hard to know, how do I cut through all of that? How do I find the curriculum, the things that my kids should be learning right now in this moment? And so that is where I think a lot of the questions are. And yes, there are the lists of, you know, top 10 learning apps and things like that. But then when you're in the app, where do I start? What do I do? What should my kid know this year? What should my kid know know what to do by the end of the year? Do I do it based on 4th grade? Do I do it based on the fact they were in 3rd grade last year? Like, and that is where a lot of the anxiety and all of the curriculum is not created, equal as we know. And so I think that, and then even within that, we're hearing sort of two things. We're hearing from parents who want to supplement or complement what they're getting from the district, either because it's only 2 hours a day, might a couple hours a day, or whatever it's hybrid, whatever that variation might be, or because it's not enough. They don't feel like their kid's on track. They're worried their kid's behind, all of these pain points. And so they're out there looking for what they can be doing with those minutes in a way, by the way, that is self-directed. Usually I have a kid right next to me. I kicked him out today, but like my first grader right next to me, right? So, but literally that's the life that parents are leading right now. And so, I'll give you an example. We are pushing ourselves at Prepared Parents right now to create a monthly, box, for lack of a better term, a monthly learning kit that has the best of what school can and should be for kids in a way that a non-educator, a parent, can deliver. Now, we can reach parents via technology. That's what allows us to scale. That's what allows us to get to as many parents, as many YMCAs, as many Boys and Girls Clubs as possible. But we are pushing ourselves to be as elegant and as simple as we can be in the actual thing, right? The goal setting, the actual project they're doing, so they can print it out and they can work on it, and they can be getting the same habits, the same skills, the same routines that matter, no matter whether they have the technology to deliver it or they need to be have technology or whatever it might be. And I think parents are they're not looking for worksheets. I want to be super clear, but they are looking for things that are meaty and important, if that makes sense.
Yeah, one thing, Michael, on the institutional response from districts that I think is not so great. Jim Blue said earlier, education reformers, we all agree about transparency. And we have this moment all of a sudden when things are so much more transparent. I mean, like Mira, I'm sitting there next to my fourth grader. I'm doing my work and he's doing his work, and I can't help but kind of peek over my shoulder and see what's going on. I can see how his teacher is teaching. I mean, oh my God. And I can certainly see the assignments that he's being given. Well, you can imagine this is freaking out a lot of people in the district sector. I mean, and we've seen some of these news stories about privacy warnings. You're not allowed to peek in on your kid's class, or teachers saying, what if these parents are listening to what we're teaching their kids? Well, yes, we're the parents. Come on. And what if we start to see, we can tell whether the assignments are fill out a worksheet or the equivalent online, or is it something meaty and really good. So I think that transparency, I hope it continues. I mean, I do hope that even in the back to normal world, there'll be a debate. Should we have cameras in the classroom for kids who are homesick, on a given day? And can we have cameras in the classroom so that parents can take a peek if they want to see what the teacher's teaching? And can parents continue to have a lot more transparency, a lot more view into what kids are being asked to do in terms of assignments? I think all of that is for the good, but it is something that the institution is going to fight tooth and nail for sure.
That's super helpful. CR, let's go to you. I know we're starting to get some questions and our time is dwindling.
Yeah, I'll just throw out 3 questions for all 3 of the panelists. One is around stable, reliable access to the internet seems to be a prerequisite for much of this conversation. And so what are you, your organizations, or organizations like yours doing to push to get us to a 100% stable, reliable internet access? Second question is just, are parents and families not already fed up with all of this online learning and online experience? Do they want more of it, or have they already, after 6 months, had enough of it? And that's the second question. And then the third question is, and I'm summarizing all of these questions, the third question is, what does this mean for special education students for whom this might not be the best or a medium that works at all for them? So Mira, maybe we start with you and work across.
To your question around our parents fed up, yes. Our kids fed up, yes, and no. And so it's this sort of, again, I had said in the beginning, or we'd started with, it's week by week. It really is week by week right now. For everyone, certainly, but most especially for kids and parents, because it's changing. And so yeah, we hear from parents what a godsend remote is, because their kids can learn, and there are things that they can be doing to fill time, whether that's from like a caregiving perspective or a learning perspective. And then you equally would get a response from a parent, the same parent, let's be clear, the next day that's like, I'm fed up. I mean, there have been moments where I want to throw my computer and my kid's iPad, against the wall, because it's hard. So I would say both. Are parents fed up? Yes. But are parents also very like I said, parents are not going to sacrifice this year. They're just not, right? No parent, they're going to do whatever it takes for their kid to learn, to have a meaningful year, to have some consistency, to not be left behind. And so if they're fed up, I mean, I think a lot of parents are like, great, I'm fed up, but I still have to keep going. I don't get a choice to stop. And so I think that feeling from parents is what's going to keep pushing, going to ebb and flow throughout the year, where parents are burnt out, we're tired, there's just so much going on, and we're going to push. And and so I think you'll see that throughout the year.
Steve, go for it.
Yeah. Well, first of all, on the access to the internet, I think the vast majority of people do have an iPhone somewhere, or if it's at the high school, they could set up an access for them, or the local public library could. And our courses they're asynchronous. If you lose connection, you can just get back on 5 minutes later. There's a written version of the course. So it's not that sensitive to internet access. And we have people all around the world taking these courses. On the second question about fed up with online learning, I want to be clear, our program is not trying to be 100% replacement for high school education and, for every kid. It's meant to be, if Abe Lincoln was reincarnated and has every ambition and absolutely no money and resources, how to help, the reincarnated Abe Lincoln afford their way into college. So it's an optional thing to make college affordable so they can get into traditional colleges. And we really did not intend it for special ed. It's meant for people who are again Abe Lincoln reincarnated, not a special ed program. But again, with a $1.6 trillion problem, saving 5% of that is $80 billion. So I mean, it's a giant need, even if we only service a small percentage. If it's 2%, it's a giant saving. So that was the goal, not to replace traditional college or traditional high school.
Yeah. Look, on the parent question, I think it's going to be really interesting this fall. I think many of us have assumed that, of course, the best case scenario is that the kids get to go back to school full time because you live in a place where the coronavirus is not so bad. And I think that's still true. And then the second one would be a hybrid, where at least your kid gets to go to school some of the time. And then the worst thing is full-time remote. I'm starting to wonder if that's necessarily the case. I'll be curious to see how this hybrid thing goes, because talking to some friends in the Boston area and some other, in some of these places, they're talking about 1 week on, 1 week off. And when you're not at school, it sounds like you're going to be getting very little instruction, if anything. So what the heck are the kids going to be doing for those weeks? And you got to believe that that's going to drive parents crazy. And the kids the older kids are going to be out hanging out with their friends, spreading the coronavirus. So, I'm starting to wonder if full-time remote goes a lot better. And again, like in Montgomery County, it actually takes up a big chunk of the day. We might find that the hybrid parents are the ones who are pulling their hair out the most. But I think that's an open question at this point. And look, back to special ed, Mira made a great, she said it so well. Clearly, this is not working well for many, many kids with disabilities. It's not working well for the smallest kids, the little guys. So, it does seem like in most parts of the country, the districts, the charters, the private schools, people should be able to bring those kids in small groups. I mean, the main risk is having large groups of kids or adults together in enclosed spaces, but bringing a small group of kids in, that should be doable. And I think that's where we're going to have to keep pushing on schools to do more of that.
You nailed one of the reasons we pulled out was the hybrid 1 week on, 1 week off, Mike, is what is our district. But final lightning round question for each of you. So let's be succinct on it. But I'm curious what you think of the changes we see right now with an eye on the technology in particular for choice. what will be lasting, and what will, snap back to the way it was whenever we come out of this. Steve, why don't you go first, and then Mike, and then Mira, you can finish this up.
Well, I mean, I think, so many college kids are so disappointed with paying full tuition for online education now. We didn't really get into that issue, that I think everyone knows that online education is eminently doable, and will say, why is it so dang expensive? And it doesn't have to be so dang expensive. And again, so I think that will be the lasting question.
Great. Mike?
Yeah, look, I do think high school kids learning more from home and not having to spend all day at school, I think that's going to happen. It helps with them getting more sleep. It helps for fitting in all the stuff that they do. It prepares them for college. I think that is a doable one. Most everything else will snap back, because it always does.
Mira?
I think that parents having been in the driver's seat, I do think is going to fundamentally change the relationship between parents and schools. And I want to be super clear. I think parents are going to rush to get their kids back into school. So it's not from that perspective. I don't think parents are going to be overwhelmingly unenrolling their kids and things like that. But I think this idea of, like, I've had an eye now of who my kid is, what he or she can and can't do, where they struggle, what they're excited about, what they're curious about, all of these things, and how they can learn, that doesn't go away. And I will be very interested to see how that does actually push into next year.
A good final word. Super appreciate Steve, Mike, Mira, and Diane, before she had to leave, having a great conversation here. CR, with dreams of a reincarnated Abe Lincoln, I will turn it over to you.
Thank you, Michael, and thank you, panelists. And as we transition to our last panel, let's thank Steve and Michael and Mira and Michael for a great panel. And as the next panel comes online, go ahead and join us on the virtual stage by turning on your videos and microphones.